It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
Earth is absolutely under siege. The powers that shouldn't be want to convince us all that the increasingly catastrophic everything can all be attributed to nature. Nothing to see here, they tell us. From off-the-charts weather everything to rapidly increasing seismic activity, all is not what it seems. First, Japan issued its first, quote, megaquake warning after powerful tremor. That's from Bloomberg News. The report states government alerts public after earthquake on Thursday. Question, where was the televised Matrix media coverage of this and on countless other breaking events while they're showing us nonstop scripted political everything from dawn till dusk? For a deeper investigation of tectonic weapons and their uses, please search geoengineeringwatch.org, microwave transmissions, earthquakes. Next, scientists have spotted unexpected X and C-shaped structures in the atmosphere. They're struggling to explain them. That's from AccuWeather.com. The report then states, astronomers have known for some time that X-shaped crest-like formations can appear in the ionosphere's plasma, a sea of charged particles, after solar storms. When else might they appear? They say, meanwhile, at night, during these active periods when the sun's radiation isn't as strong, is also when low-density bubbles appear in the atmosphere. Also, they say it demonstrates that the lower atmosphere weather could have enormous impact on the ionosphere. Let's stop there. What aren't the so-called experts and official sources not disclosing in this report? That what takes place in the ionosphere can, and in fact must, have a profound impact on weather in the troposphere, aka where we live, at least for the moment. For new listeners that are not familiar with what an ionosphere heater is, let's take the example of HAARP in Alaska. An ionosphere heater transmits an extraordinary amount of power into the electrically charged ionosphere. In the case of the HAARP facility in Glaucona, Alaska, it transmits about 3.6 million watts of power. This causes an electrical chain reaction, superheating the ionosphere, expanding the atmosphere up and down. The downward push of the atmosphere creates a high-pressure heat dome in the troposphere. And what do we hear so-called climate experts now and meteorologists stating commonly? High-pressure heat dome, crushing heat under those high-pressure heat domes. Clockwise circulation in the northern hemisphere that pushes moisture and upper-level wind patterns around that high-pressure heat dome. Everything underneath that fries, just as we're doing in Northern California, absolutely baking day in, day out. Everything is dying here, and there are many regions around the world that are experiencing exactly the same. Ionosphere heaters are used to steer upper-level wind currents, steering weather patterns, aka climate engineering. Let's press on. The ionosphere is, and has long since been, used as a physics lab for the global military-industrial complex. It's now clearly also being used as a covert battleground with absolutely no consideration whatsoever of the consequences for us all. From the dozens of ionosphere heaters around the world, different designs, HAARP again being only one example, to the decades of detonating nuclear weapons in the atmosphere, including Project Starfish Prime, hydrogen bombs in the magnetosphere, and the so-called experts thought it could collapse the entire atmosphere. Did that stop them from doing this? Of course not. The elements of the human race, too many elements in the human race, have long since made their propensity toward total insanity clear. And the task of the so-called science community is to cover the tracks of the military-industrial complex and the climate engineers, which are one and the same. Mysterious shapes forming in ionosphere plasma? Just nature? Or something altogether different, unnatural, and nefarious? You decide. Next, let's add this. Modern airplanes are worse for the environment than older aircraft, study warns, throwing a wrench in the works for the aviation industry. That's from the dailymail.com. From the report, modern planes fly at higher altitudes, creating longer-lasting contrails, they say, than older models, according to research from the Imperial College in London. First, let's stop there. The higher altitude the lower the relative humidity. By far, exactly the wrong conditions for any, quote, contrail formation, especially given the fact that modern jet aircraft are propelled by high bypass turbofan jet engines, i.e. a jet-powered fan. 90% of the air that moves through a high bypass turbofan jet engine is not combusted, which further diminishes its potential to produce any, quote, contrail. And then there is the fact that Geoengineeringwatch.org has numerous film footage captures of heavy jet aircraft, commercial and military, at altitude, nozzles visible, turning dispersions on and off. End of any debate. It isn't condensation. The Daily Mail report continues. Just like natural clouds, these, quote, contrails trap excess heat in the atmosphere and may contribute more to climate change than the carbon produced by burning jet fuel. Again, more confirmation of what Geoengineering Watch has stated on the record for a decade and a half. Geoengineering can and does create short-term, highly toxic surface cooldowns at the cost of further fueling the overall planetary meltdown. More from the report. Quote, when the conditions are right, they say soot from the engine can become coated in water vapor and seed the formation of ice crystals, which produce larger clouds. That's exactly the stated definition of solar radiation management, by the way, intentional jet dispersions of nanoparticles into the atmosphere. They say then, as these clouds linger in the atmosphere, they act like a silvery emergency blanket, reflecting infrared energy back to Earth and preventing heat from escaping. Again, this is exactly what Geoengineeringwatch.org has always stated on the record. And it's not just soot. It's a reflective heavy metal mix of nanoparticles like aluminum, polymers, graphene, the list goes on and on. And yes, the so-called solar radiation management dispersions are trapping more heat overall than they're deflecting, aka making an already beyond dire planetary meltdown scenario far worse still, to use weather as a weapon, pushing us all from the proverbial frying pan into the fire. Final excerpt from this report. In this study, the researchers used satellite images taken from NASA's GOESR satellite to track more than 64,000, quote, contrails from aircraft flying over the North Atlantic Ocean. Newer aircraft are flying higher and higher in the atmosphere to increase fuel efficiency and reduce carbon emissions, they say. The unintended consequences of this is that these aircraft flying over North Atlantic and other areas are now creating more longer-lived, quote, contrails, trapping additional heat in the atmosphere and increasing the climate impact of aviation. The very premise of solar radiation management operations is, of course, completely and totally flawed and false. Global climate intervention operations are ultimately about power and control, nothing less. Here's an important short review for new listeners. The entire premise, again, of so-called solar radiation management operations, aka the stated purpose, is to fill Earth's skies with reflective, light-scattering particles to mimic the short-term toxic cooling effect of a volcanic eruption. And here's one more hole in that narrative. The most recent studies on what has long been believed to be an overall cooling effect from volcanic eruptions has now been proven false. In other words, volcanic eruptions also further fuel the overall long-term warming of the planet, including destroying the ozone layer, which climate engineering is also doing now. So where does that leave us? What must we now conclude? That so-called solar radiation management operations, aka geoengineering, jet spraying our skies with highly toxic mixes of heavy metals, polymers, surfactants, graphene, the list goes on and on, is ultimately and completely nefarious. It's about, again, power and control. Controlling where it rains, where it doesn't, controlling food supplies in the same way, how contaminated that food is, what kind of contamination, where firestorms will take place, and where they won't, where extreme hail will wreak havoc and where not. I could go on and on, but you get the point. As former U.S. President Lyndon Baines Johnson stated all the way back in 1962, quote, "He who controls the weather controls the world." And for our on-air radio listeners, go to the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org under the recent column and click the YouTube for this broadcast. First 20 seconds, you'll see Lyndon Johnson on film on the record stating exactly what I just said. And this for the record, a reminder. The same core of control that has manipulated Earth's climate for its own agendas for decades has also orchestrated and instigated countless conflicts and conflict zones over many decades to this very day. covertly arming the very terrorist groups they claim to be fighting against. The Hegelian dialect, problem, reaction, solution, with the so-called solution only applying for those that write the script. Certainly not a benefit for the endless list of victims from it. Next, about all those toxic nanoparticles in our skies that so-called experts just can't figure out the origin of. Born to modulate, researchers reveal origins of climate-controlling particles. That's an interesting way to state that, isn't it? That's from phys.org. Aerosol particles are tiny, they say, swirling suspended in the air around us. Yes, they certainly are. Go out on a very dark night with no light pollution, brightest light you can find, aim it straight at the sky, look up through that beam after a day of heavy aerosol dispersions, you'll be shocked. It looks like you're in a snowstorm, can't see it during the daytime. As they say, tiny particles swirling suspended in the air around us, which we all get to breathe, by the way. They say most are smaller than the smallest bug, thinner than the thinnest hair on your head. Let's pause there. Not just thinner than the thinnest hair on your head. Let's put some accuracy in this statement. Up to 100,000 nanoparticles can fit across the width of a single human hair. Inconceivably small. Continuing from the report. Gossamer specks, they say, practically invisible to the naked eye. Let's stop there. Again, correction, they are completely invisible if they're in nanoparticle form. The report continues. Newly formed ones are nano-sized. Newly formed? What's that mean? Formed from what? Or came from where? Look up for your answer. More from the report. Yet, they say their influence, the small particles, is gargantuan. They determine the color of sunsets. They inflict over 3 million premature deaths each year. Again, they referring to the atmosphere full of toxic nanoparticles, and about the 3 million deaths a year respiratorily. For the record, this estimate is a gross understatement. And the power these particulates hold, the report says, over our climate is massive. Again, referring to the atmosphere saturation of nanoparticles. But, the report states, climate models today are partly blind to these extensive particle peaks. When pressed to estimate how many particles are present or where in the atmosphere they show up, even the best models greatly underestimate their abundance or misidentify at which altitudes they appear. And let's not forget the so-called meteorologists that have routinely labeled massive 1,000-square-mile aerosol clouds as, quote, clouds of dragonflies or clouds of ladybugs or grasshoppers. And no, I'm not making this up. They've actually stated this on film on the record. Question, have you or anyone you know or have ever met seen a 1,000-square-mile cloud of insects of any kind? I didn't think so. Second question, have you taken the time to observe jets dispersing a particulate trail that spreads out, lingers, merges together with dispersions from other jets to eventually cover the entire sky? If you haven't seen this, you're not looking up. Please check the jet spraying section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for shocking film footage of all that I just described. Back to the report on atmospheric aerosols. They say climate controlling clouds. Aerosols and clouds have a close-knit relationship. Aerosol particles are the seeds of clouds. Atmospheric moisture condenses on aerosol particle surfaces, one water molecule clouding after another. Like strands of cotton candy, they say, layering atop a cone. A particle's properties, aka its chemical composition, its size and structure, shape, the traits of the resulting cloud formations that form it, dictate what happens in the atmosphere. One particle type, they say, might make its corresponding cloud more likely to rain. Another particle type might determine whether a cloud reflects more or less sunlight, in turn determining whether the Earth's atmosphere warms more or less. In this way, the report says clouds and aerosol particles control much of our weather and climate. Yes, they do. They then say they can warm, cool, or even alter the structure and flow of the Earth's atmosphere, which, for the record, includes the ability to completely shut down the flow of precipitation to any given region for as long as the weather makers want, or to inflict devastating deluge wherever the geoengineers want. And let's not forget the now constant extreme hailstorms with baseball-sized hail, a direct result of chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding operations. Please search the engineering winter section, which can happen in summer as well when they want to create a short-term toxic surface cool down. I could go on and on and on. But again, you get the point. weather warfare. On top of the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org, categories of climate engineering that are critical to investigate: engineering drought, engineering wildfires, engineering winter. You won't like what you learn. This is Dane Wigington. You're listening to the weekly installment of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News Report, the end of the world as we know it broadcast, brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of climate engineering operations, aka weather warfare. Can't state this strongly enough. Reaching a critical mass of awareness is the only way forward in this fight. Only when those who are actively or passively participating and their families realize that they are in fact participating in their own demise do we have any chance of stopping these operations from the inside out. We can and we must reach a critical mass. Starting a conversation on the climate engineering issue that leads people to a credible source of data is imperative. Geoengineeringwatch.org will continue all of our efforts to be the go-to source on covert climate engineering operations. A conversation on climate engineering can easily be started with Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials available on our homepage. We pass on our printed materials, which are the most effective key to the door at less than our cost of producing and shipping. I have one mission in this battle: to once and for all expose and halt the intentional decimation of Earth's primary life support systems and the contamination, ubiquitous contamination of everything on planet Earth, every breath we take. That is my mission. It will remain my mission until I'm no longer standing or until it stops. Period. I need all the help I can get. This can't be done by the few on behalf of the many. It will take all of us. And the Geoengineering Watch groundbreaking documentary, The Dimming, available for free on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org, free from day one, in spite of Geoengineering Watch spending well into six figures producing that film, free from day one. Now over 20 million views, thanks to your help. Thanks to your help with circulating this critical informational documentary and helping us to overcome the draconian social media censorship as the power structure tries to suppress this issue, which would cause a shockwave around the world if populations were awoken to the fact that this is occurring in their skies, that their governments are actively or passively participating in this insanity without their knowledge or consent. If we can fully expose it, we will certainly, again, cause a shockwave around the world. It will be a quantum leap in the right direction, a leap we must take or we're doomed. Next, from phys.org, not the day after tomorrow. Why we can't predict the timing of climate tipping points. More difficult than previously thought, especially when you're not taking into account the climate engineering elephant in the sky, you think? First, the report says predictions rely on assumptions regarding the underlying physical mechanisms as well as regarding future human actions to extrapolate past data into the future. They just want to dance around what they're omitting from this puzzle, which is happening above our heads. They then say these assumptions can be overly simplistic and lead to significant errors. Second, they say long-term direct observations of the climate systems are rare, and the Earth system components in question may not be suitably represented by the data. Again, all of this dancing around the climate engineering issue. The PHYS report then states this: the new study revealed that weather modeling, quote, uncertainties are so large that predictions are not reliable. Imagine that. No surprise on that conclusion. Translation: the so-called experts aren't going to tell you, me, or anyone else the truth. They will never admit to it or calculate it into the equation. The shockingly obvious climate engineering elephant in the sky, which they, the controllers, aka those who print the money, want populations to pretend isn't really there. And unfortunately, far too many in the ranks of the human race are all too happy to oblige. Bread and circus till the brutal, bitter end, till the moment of impact, which is already unfolding. Endless scripted political theater, big pharma commercials, many of them for respiratory ailments, no surprise, and the ads for Caribbean cruises on superheating and dying by the day oceans. Welcome to the planetary asylum. About hurricane season, what is scheduled to be the worst ever, though the script could be changed at any time. From WTBW.com, tracking the tropics, Debbie expected to stall and bring catastrophic flooding to the Carolinas. Did it? Brought a lot of flooding, but they siphoned off much of this moisture. This storm was used to cool the East Coast while the West Coast fries under the ridiculously resilient ridge of high pressure. And that's what the so-called experts call it. They don't try to explain it. They don't mention ionosphere heater-induced high-pressure heat domes that are causing the literal dying and withering away of western forests and crops, which will show up on the food shelf soon enough. But about Debbie, yes, used as a moisture pump to cool the East Coast. Here's another from AccuWeather. Why Tropical Storm Debbie is expected to stall over the southeast. They say Debbie may have made landfall in Florida, but the worst impacts of this hurricane are expected in the days to come. This was early in the week, as it dumps massive amounts of rain on Georgia and the Carolinas, which it did dump substantial rain. But what are the other agendas being carried out? What are all the agendas being carried out when we know we have hurricane modification and suppression operations that have been active since 1947? We know the technology exists to completely disperse these storms if they choose to, which they're certainly not, and the technology exists to augment these storms. And there is ample satellite imagery and frequency transmission recordings that conclusively demonstrate there is so much more to this equation. Let's add this. From WHDH Boston, Tropical Storm Debbie brings catastrophic flooding, tornadoes after making second landfall, again, meandering around all over. Here's the summary of Debbie. Again, the storm was steered from Florida to the northeast with the land-based network of frequency transmissions, which we have a proof positive record of. Please search geoengineeringwatch.org hurricanes for about a half dozen short video reports, including Hurricane Harvey, Ian, and others, that clearly and inarguably reveal storms being steered. Try a search engine other than Google, please, because Google is doing their best to hide geoengineeringwatch.org data. Debbie was used as a massive East Coast cooling water pump, again, as I stated. Much of the moisture was scattered to a far wider area. Chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding operations conducted over the storm, and a short-term toxic surface cool-down created in various regions, while so much of the rest of the planet again spirals into total meltdown. Keeping the most populated regions of the U.S. chemically cooled, the east half of the U.S. lower 48, helps the controllers to further fuel the population's confusion and division in regard to the true extent of damage done to the planet, along with the gravity and immediacy of the abrupt climate collapse scenario that is already unfolding by the day. More on flooding that the U.S. televised matrix media routinely omits, while bombarding us with, again, nonstop political theater. Here's just one example. And let's venture off to the far north for this report, because we know now that flash flooding is becoming the norm on the U.S. East Coast. Here's the headline. It happened so fast. Speed and scale of Juneau, it's Juneau, Alaska, flooding caught residents by surprise. How many know about this? Juneau, Alaska. Christopher Hill, 28, has lived in his Mendenhall Valley home all his life. It's in Alaska. He said a friend living on a nearby street collided with him around 2:30 a.m. Tuesday to say she was evacuating because of rapidly rising floodwaters from the Mendenhall Glacier. He looked outside and saw torrents of water rushing around his house and said within the next minute it was almost up to his waist. And so he threw all kinds of things, kids, dog, bags, everything in the truck, and took off down the road. He said cars were floating in the floodwaters. This is worthy of the images. Drastic flooding. Didn't hear a word on televised matrix media, anything. We only see what they want us to see. And this is just one small example. So back to the complete manipulation of Earth's atmosphere and climate systems, and the most prominent climate engineer that's tasked by the controllers to convince populations that geoengineering operations so clearly visible in our skies are just a proposal. Yes, don't believe your lying eyes. From the New York Times, the scientist who wants to alter Earth's atmosphere. The leading so-called scientist that the New York Times is referring to is none other than Dr. David Keith, the face of climate engineering deception. If you want to see Dr. Keith confronted face-to-face, view the geoengineeringwatch.org documentary, The Dimming, for free on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. After I confronted Dr. Keith at an international climate engineering conference, my press pass was denied. I was told I would not be allowed to attend future conferences with AAAS. That was the sanctioning organization. So if you're not okay with those so-called experts, so-called scientists who are clearly tasked with confusing the public as to the reality of climate engineering, trying to convince them it's just a proposal while it's raging in skies above our heads, perhaps these scientists should be put on notice that once these operations are fully exposed, one can only assume that populations will then hold them legally and morally accountable for this deception. And it is a deception unless they're simply criminally ignorant of the very science field in which we're told they're experts. It's one or the other. Willful deception or criminal ignorance. You decide. Back to exactly how bad is it. This week from Fox News, this headline: study finds major Earth systems likely on track to collapse. That doesn't sound good, does it? And then the blatant glaring lie, pushed by Fox News and others, that's intended to pacify populations till the looming moment of impact. Fox News then continues with mind-numbing delusional deception. They say under current policies, the world faces a scenario in which Earth's life support systems have roughly even odds of either surviving or collapsing during the next 3 centuries. That's according to the results published in Nature Communications. Really? 3 centuries? Total delusion. I'll explain. Stay with me. Here's a parallel headline first from MSN. Earth systems critical to all life are on the verge of total collapse. That sounds bad too, doesn't it? Let's follow this through. Same deception. Earth is getting closer to critical points that could permanently disrupt its complex systems. They say our planet is in a dangerously precarious state. Pretending otherwise, they say, or simply continuing to ignore the issue definitely won't make it go away. That's true. We've reached the point of no return, and no amount of denial will change that fact. Let's keep going. The Fox and MSN reports then state, the research shows that even small temperature increases can have a domino effect, spoken about that many times in this broadcast. Cascading collapse happening now, leading to serious consequences for both biodiversity and our way of life. What's our way of life? Looting, plundering, pillaging, polluting from countries around the globe at the point of a gun until there's nothing left? Is that what we're trying to preserve? How long could anyone possibly think that could continue? They say worrying scenarios, along with the possible collapse of the Amazon rainforest, that's already happening, and ocean acidification, that's well on its way, are serious threats if we keep going down our current path. What a gross understatement. For the record, all the threats just described aren't coming, they're now. It's already happening and has been. And next comes the lies of colossal proportion from Matrix Media, the public pacification part. Again, following current policies, these reports say, this century would commit us to a high tipping point risk of 45% by 2300. Wait, 2300? Yes, that's what the report states. It then states, findings show there's a 45% or greater chance of these collapses occurring in the next 300 years, even if we manage to keep global warming below 1.5 C for a bit. What's really alarming, the report says, is that these changes might be irreversible. That's like saying, again, if you kamikaze from a 100-story building impacting on the sidewalk, that the changes to your body could be, quote, irreversible. So let's put this into perspective. Matrix Media report states that we might face some challenges 300 years from now. Really? Here's how absurd that conclusion of beyond comprehension deception is. Industrialized, militarized, so-called societies have literally laid waste to our formerly thriving planet in the last 200 years. So much so, and on so many fronts, aka global climate and ecosystem collapse now, global crop and fisheries collapse now, global insect and wildlife population collapse now. And want to put numbers behind that? Let's put numbers behind those two. First we have a species extinction rate of about 200 to 300 plant, animal, and insect a day, which is about 15,000 times the background rate. Global insect populations, terrestrial and aquatic, down 80 to 90%. Total crash. Plankton populations down about 90% in the Atlantic. Other oceans not far behind. Wildlife populations declined 70% in the last 40 years alone and crashing at a much faster rate even now. Earth's life-sustaining ozone layer already spiraling into functional collapse in the extremely near term, the next 2 or 3 years at most. Almost there now. In fact, our latest UV measurements show approximately 30% of the ozone layer on average globally remaining. 30% remaining, not 30% gone, 30% remaining. No ozone layer, game over. And the only frontline scientists that are telling the truth of how bad it is have already concluded that if we remain on the current course, it is doubtful if anyone will make the end of the decade, this decade. And Matrix Media says we might have some challenges 300 years from now. I fully realize how many there are who will gleefully cling to the total Pollyanna lunacy cited by power structure sources on timelines and roll their eyes in total rejection of the end of this decade conclusion. Again, if we remain on the current course, which at the moment looks likely. Here's my response to such denial. Better cling to it tightly, because in the coming weeks and months, a total reality rethink of just how bad it is will be all but impossible not to take part in for any that are not clinically blind or completely asleep at the wheel. Existential challenges are closing in from every direction. The equation could not be more nonlinear, and tragically, the vast majority of populations have been well trained not to think in or even understand nonlinear scenarios. This must change, or we have no chance. Final statement of mind-numbing fiction from the Matrix media sources. By sticking to the Paris Agreement, they say, and aiming for net zero emissions, we can steer clear of disaster and create a stable, thriving world for everyone. The urgency to take action is clear, they say. The time to act is now. The full study was published again in the journal Nature Communications. They say we need to commit to sustainable practices, innovate for a greener future, and protect the delicate balance of our planet for those who come after us. I'll stop there. What a trainload of total delusion. Here's my final rebuttal. The continued construction of wind turbines, solar panels, and electric vehicles, all of which are also damaging what's left of the environment, won't save us. And about those who come after us, they will never be, short of a complete course correction by the human race. Search and view Planet of the Humans, a documentary exposing how non-renewable so-called renewable energy is. And for those that think my criticism of green energy is somehow an endorsement of carbon fuels, it isn't. Both, in their current forms and uses, are pushing us all over the edge of the abyss. So, how long did MSN and Fox say we have? 300 years? Not so much. In fact, here's a few examples of not so much, even from CNN, because in fact, the converging catastrophes are kicking the front door in right now. Again, from CNN, a critical system of Atlantic Ocean currents, they're talking about the AMOC, could collapse as early as the 2030s, new research shows. The CNN report states several studies in recent years have suggested the crucial system, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, or the AMOC, could be on course for collapse. No. Not could, not may, not might. Let's keep going. It gets worse. Next headline, also from CNN. AMOC could be on course to collapse potentially as early as 2025. From the UK Guardian, Gulf Stream could collapse as early as 2025. From Al Jazeera, scientists warn Gulf Stream could collapse as early as 2025. Question, why has it taken mainstream media so long to finally admit to the converging catastrophes that Geoengineeringwatch.org has been desperately trying to warn about for a decade and a half? Because it's now all but impossible to hide. That's why. And to any that believe this planet-altering event isn't real, or other events like it, or that these events won't directly and completely alter their lives, think again. And this is but one of, again, countless converging catastrophes with the clinically insane controllers at the helm of the already sinking ship. What could go wrong? And climate engineering raging above all of it. About what could go wrong, we're about to find out the hard way, as we are all passengers on the planetary Titanic. You're listening to the weekly installment of Global Alert News, the Bad News Broadcast, installment number 470. God, this has been a long and arduous journey for me. I don't even remember what my life was like before this, but I can't do otherwise. August 10th, 2024. This is Dane Wigington, your host. Global Alert News is brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of climate intervention operations known as geoengineering. Credibility is key in this fight. Credibility. You must have a watertight boat to navigate a rapidly rising sea of distraction and deception. Geoengineering Watch has always staunchly maintained our credibility and our independence, and we always will. Recordings of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News report can be found on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org under the recent column and on the Dane Wigington YouTube channel. Geoengineering Watch wishes to express our deepest gratitude to those that have helped us to expand our reach and thus our voice in this desperate last-hour effort to sound the alarm before the bell rings, if you will. Sand in the hourglass is running out so fast. If you're on our email list, please put us on your email contact book so that our mailouts don't go to the spam files. Please help us to share the groundbreaking documentary, The Dimming, which fully exposes the climate engineering atrocities, now with over 20 million views on YouTube. The best way to share is by circulating the direct link to The Dimming by email directly from the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Sharing directly helps us to overcome social media censorship. When viewing our YouTube of The Dimming or Global Alert News or any other Geoengineering Watch video on YouTube, please subscribe, share, and comment, all of which helps us to circulate critically important data to a much wider audience. Again, my deepest gratitude to all those that have helped us share this critically important tool. How do we reach those that still aren't looking up? Here's one way. Start a conversation with Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials. They can be found on our homepage. Again, our only goal, provide activists what they need to move this fight forward. Extremely high quality and compelling printed images. A picture's worth 1,000 words, and we pass these printed materials on for less than our cost of producing and shipping. Again, my only mission is to once and for all expose and then halt the insanity in our skies, and reaching a critical mass of awareness is the only way forward in that fight. Only when those, again, actively or passively participating in their families realize what they're a part of do we have a chance to stop these programs from the inside out. We have Geoengineering Watch hoodies to go with our new Geoengineering Watch shirts. Photos of both are on our homepage. We have scannable business cards, bumper stickers, all effective tools to help strike up a conversation on the climate engineering issue. Reaching a critical mass of awareness on the issue, again, the great imperative of our time. If we can expose it, we can stop it. If you're willing to share a picture of yourself with a Geoengineering Watch t-shirt or hoodie, ideally in some crowded location, please send your photo to us so that we can post it as part of our activist compilation, which is now part of our materials page. The images encourage others to stand up and make their voices heard in this all-important battle to sound the alarm. Again, we are running out of time rapidly. And to all those who are steadfastly committed to this must-win fight for all that matters, I want to express, as always, my deepest and most profound gratitude to you. It's our collective efforts that can absolutely still make a difference, even at this late hour. Never doubt the power of one. Take a good long look in the mirror. That one is you. About the firestorms laying waste to what's left of the planet. On several days this week, an extremely ominous pyrocumulus cloud from the ongoing park fire was looming large southeast of my mountaintop off-grid home. And though this horrible firestorm is now heading away from my location, it is consuming vast swaths of our remaining forest as it heads toward Lassen National Park. The relentless ionosphere heater-induced high-pressure heat dome over the western U.S. has parched our forests to the driest state and lowest fuel moisture levels ever. It's unimaginably dry here. Any spark anywhere will start another spark fire. So consider and remember, whatever the source of ignition was for the park fire or any other particular blaze, the bottom line in the equation is this: what factor set the template for the record incinerations? For that answer, search the Engineering Wildfires section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. You will be shocked at what you learn. About the ongoing game of firestorm roulette in the western U.S. from CNN, repeated wildfires put pressure on residents, making it difficult to recover peace of mind. The report says the climate crisis continues. No mention of geoengineering, of course, or its direct relationship to the firestorms. They say the climate crisis continues to cause exponential growth of wildfires, not wildfires. Much more to this equation. Many more people must now deal with not just one fire, but what seems like an annual string of them. Yes, it's the norm here now. Firestorm roulette, and it's taking a toll on their sense of mental well-being. Why wouldn't it? They say fires aren't just a physical threat to health and safety. Exposure can increase the risk of post-traumatic stress disorder, alcohol and substance use disorders, sleep problems, as well as mental health problems that could last years. 94 large wildfires are raging across multiple states in the West. 28 had evacuation orders. Let's keep going. From UK Guardian. Wildfires in Brazil's Pantanal wetland. This is an ongoing horrible scenario. The pictures are horrific of burnt wildlife and burnt forest. And this Pantanal wetland, they say, fueled by climate disruption in quotation marks. Question, should they have said climate disruption operations? Ongoing for many decades, you decide. The report then says massive wildfires are becoming a new normal in the Pantanal, the area of wetland submerged by floodwaters, again, largest wetland in the world, is decreasing as temperatures increase, making vegetation much drier and more flammable, just like all of the western U.S. Yearly rainfall in the Pantanal has been decreasing for more than 40 years. Imagine that. On a planet that's getting warmer, and laws of physics that state a warmer planet must rain more. The atmosphere holds 7% more moisture for every degree C of warming. We're likely past 3.5 C now based on unspun data and pre-industrial baselines. How can it not be raining more in so many locations, but far, far less? There's a factor we're not being told about that the so-called climate science community will not admit to. When will they find their courage? When will those in academia decide that they're here for a reason, and that reason isn't a paycheck and a pension that will soon be gone anyway? Get on deck of the Titanic and sound the alarm while you can. Make your life worth living. Be able to look yourself in the mirror and your children in the eyes. Do what's right while you still can. Stand together and stand up as one so you can't be so easily knocked down. We are rapidly running out of time. From MSN, the Mediterranean is on fire. Experts sound warnings about why marine heat waves are so dangerous. In the ocean also, as above, so is below. From the report, Spain has sweltered under 3 heat waves so far this summer, with temperatures reaching up to 43 C in the southeast. But the report says it's the heat wave of the sea that has experts especially concerned. The Mediterranean, quote, is on fire. Oceans dying around the world. Oceans die, we die. From AccuWeather, fall forecast, warm autumn to fuel second summer across most of the U.S. That is the scheduled weather. Again, on a planet that's already spiraling into total meltdown, add climate intervention operations, and they can make and are making and have always made an already horrific situation worse still. The report says meteorological fall starts on Sunday, September 1st, but for many it will take much longer before cool, crisp autumn weather arrives. For many eagerly awaiting the arrival of sweater weather and cool, cozy evenings, it may feel like summer is overstaying its welcome. AccuWeather's team of long-range forecasters, they're script readers. Let's call them what they are. They're script readers. Has one word for the upcoming season: warm. This year, the transition from summery to fall-like weather takes place slower and much later than usual. It's going to get worse all the way around. Those in the climate engineering cabal that think they had control over these systems are now chasing a ball downhill and simply further disintegrating what's left of the climate. And it's all they know how to do is double down. It's like living in hell here where I'm at in Northern California. Lifeless, things dying. I'm losing fish in my pond. There's now a warning in California not to swim in any lakes or rivers because they're all blooming with algae because the water's superheating, deoxygenating, and dying. How long does anybody think we can continue in this course? How obvious is it at this point that we are circling the drain? From MSN.com, U.S. weather forecast, scorching heat to last for months, as if it hasn't been that way already. As Americans get to have an extended summer, oh boy, more die-off. They say some 6 to 8 million acres of land are at risk of burning as searing heat dome wedges over America. I mentioned the heat dome earlier, didn't I? Ionosphere heater maintained. That's what they do. The technology is clear. It's not scientifically disputed. Please research it. If you don't think this is possible, how many people 100 years ago would have thought it's possible to talk on a little black box with no wires to the other side of the world? They would have locked you up. Please, please don't go off ideology and hearsay. Please do actual, honest, objective research. The report then says cooler weather may not arrive until November as the nation battles an oppressive record-toppling heat wave. Paradise Fire happened in November, so do we have 3 more months or more of hellish conditions? There won't be any forest left. That's how bad it is. From the Washington Post, Death Valley just recorded the hottest month ever observed on the planet. July was also the hottest month on record for dozens of other cities in western U.S. states, including Sacramento, Las Vegas, and Portland, Oregon. From SF Gate, Northern California officials issued toxic algae warning for rivers and lakes. Just mentioned that a moment ago. This is truly horrific. I mean, the fish are almost gone. They're toxic anyway. What do people think we're going to eat? When I hear people say, if things get bad, I'll just live off the land. Really? What land would you live off of? I have 2,000 square miles of wilderness out my back door. I know that region better than anybody alive. I couldn't make it there myself. The animals can't make it there. And people think they're going to, quote, live off the land. You can't grow a garden here. It scorches in the unimaginably intense UV, and the soils are toxic. Soil microbiome is dead. That's why trees are toppling over everywhere, because their root systems are dying back from the toxic rain. And the crowns of the trees get scorched by the intense UV radiation from the disintegrating ozone layer. I'm a wealth of wonderful news, right? But we have to face the unspun horizon for it to have any chance of making a difference. From IFLscience.com, Antarctica is being hit with a worryingly long heat wave, potentially breaking records. No, potentially. It already has and will continue to. They say East Antarctica showed temperatures that were 45 degrees or more above average. Covered that partially last week as well. 50 degrees above average in Antarctica. 50 degrees. That would be like Redding, California, having an ambient temperature right now of about 155 degrees. Would that get anybody's attention? That's what it's like in Antarctica. From AccuWeather, hundreds of sick sea lions beached themselves on California coast. This is an ongoing story as well, with signs of algae poisoning. Not to mention, off the Southern California coast, the 500,000 barrels of toxic DDT dumped in. That's one location alone. There's thought to be 18 others. Superheating oceans. None of this is mentioned. They try to make it sound like it's just some rogue algae bloom. There's so much more to this equation. And when I see these dead, struggling seals that I have spent so many years of my life swimming with in solitude for hours at a time, surrounded by them, up close, inches from my mask, they're beautiful, miraculous creatures, and to see them being decimated from what our species has done to this planet in the geologic blink of an eye absolutely breaks my heart. The AccuWeather report continues. Hundreds of sea lions with domoic acid poisoning have beached themselves in California in recent days as a result of eating prey contaminated by toxic algae blooms. They're lucky they can find anything because the fisheries have collapsed up and down the coast. The sea lions are presenting with a mix of stargazing, staring into space, disorientation, head wavering, mouth foaming, lethargy, unresponsiveness, erratic behavior, inability to get out of the incoming tide, involuntary muscle spasms, and seizures. How heartbreaking is this? Let's keep going. More headlines. The human race pedal to the metal, hurtling toward near-term self-annihilation. Stop deep-sea mining before it starts. This is from Greenpeace. The Global Greenpeace Network is working to prevent a new destructive extractive industry from ever getting started in the oceans. Our position, no deep-sea mining. I agree with Greenpeace on that. Greenpeace, how about if you look up in the skies? That's going to destroy us sooner than anything if it continues. In fact, that weapon can be used for so many layers of power structure, total control. Why aren't you, Greenpeace, addressing what's happening in our skies? Because you don't want to lose your 501 nonprofit status? Because that's what your attorneys told attorneys at geoengineeringwatch.org. The epitome of hypocrisy. Please look up. Address the whole truth, not just part of it. From the Herald Sun in Australia, temperatures in Great Barrier Reef reach 400-year high, scientists reveal. Scientists have revealed coordinated action must be taken to save the Great Barrier Reef after water temperatures reach unprecedented levels. You can't just stop this kind of momentum. The planet's been warming at the thermal energy equivalent rate of 7 Hiroshima bombs, the heat contained in 7 Hiroshima bombs per second, about 400,000 a day. Most of that has gone to the oceans. You can't just turn that off. This has been coming for a very, very long time, while the vast majority look the other way. From MSN, heat wave intensifies from coast to coast, worsening wildfires. Follow up on what I stated earlier. In fact, let's go a little deeper into this direction. The combination of hot temperatures, high heat indexes, as well as very warm morning lows, only dropping into the upper 70s. It's in the 80s here on the east side of Lake Shasta. It's ridiculously hot, even at night. Will be dangerous to anyone without access to adequate air conditioning. That'll work. Let's all just get bigger air conditioners and crank them up. That'll fix everything, right? The National Weather Service warned the West will also face hazardous air quality due to ongoing fires. What's being dispersed above those fires? What possible justification could the climate engineers have for dispersing aerosols directly above the smoke canopy? Whatever it is, it cannot be benevolent. Next on the UK Guardian, it's devastating. Summer in Canada's Arctic region brings severe heat waves. From the Weather Channel Climate Engineering Cover-Up Organization, Alaska location preliminarily breaks state's northernmost all-time heat record. From CBC Canada, heat records broken across Northwest Territories with more hot days ahead. From the European Wilderness Society, highest temperatures ever in the Arctic and Antarctic. Think about that. For the record, this week, Fort McPherson in the Northwest Territories of Canada, north of the Arctic Circle, hit 95 degrees warmer than parts of Florida at that time. From yahoo.com, massive hail strikes southern Alberta Monday, causes major damage. Photos and videos from online sources show widespread damage to vehicles and houses, as well as major damage to the Calgary International Airport. So there you have it. If it's too hot, just have the climate engineers chemically nucleate atmospheric moisture over your region. Problem fixed. As long as you don't mind being battered by baseball-sized hailstones. And about the mind-numbing proposals from the so-called experts from IFLscience.com. Vault on the moon to preserve Earth's biodiversity proposed by scientists. Really? Is that vault going to be next to the EV dune buggy that we were told astronauts recreated on in the 60s, but we never made it back because NASA lost the technology and, we're told, taped over most of the film reels of the whole adventure because no one was watching them and the film reels were expensive, they say, and we're expected to believe all that? And now we're expected to gulp down the plan to save Earth by building a tomb on the moon to store Earth DNA? And this proposal from so-called experts? Just another day in the planetary asylum. And on the subject of the asylum, so many in the ranks of the human race are more than willing to participate in the paradigm of the Matrix, but so very few seem capable or willing to consider the extremely near-term, self-annihilating consequences of the already collapsing carbon fuel carnival of total insanity. Here's but one example from grist.org. How Pennsylvania's oil industry quietly dumped waste across the state. Spreading fracking wastewater on roads is banned. Oil and gas companies do it anyway. That's from the report. Oil and gas companies have continued to spread their wastewater practically unchecked across the state thanks to a loophole in the state's regulations. Even though studies have shown radium from oil and gas wastewater, and there's many, many other chemicals, which contains 300 to 560 times the acceptable levels of radioactive substances. There's no acceptable levels. Any level's toxic. Has made its way into roadside vegetation, fresh water, and up the food chain. What a surprise. What a great idea, dumping extremely toxic fracking wastewater all over the landscape. And what they don't dump there gets pressure pumped back into the ground where it causes earthquakes. Yes, fracking, the highly toxic legacy that keeps on giving. Also permanently poisoning the last of our remaining aquifers. And to those that will reject the absolutely just criticism of the fracking stupidity because they say if we don't have a better way to keep their motorhomes fueled up, then I should shut up, but I won't. Never. Fracking is also fueling the geoengineering jets, isn't it? What a paradox that those who claim to be against being sprayed like rats from the sky are waving their banners in full support of the fracking insanity. Please take the time to view the documentary Gasland if you want the truth about fracking. From every conceivable direction, the human race is blindly sprinting down the path to certain, extremely near-term self-annihilation. On that note, new from DWTV in Germany, this, quote, "Are we too stupid to save the planet?" Let's cut to the chase on that one. The short answer at this critical point in time seems to be yes. I hope and pray for a miracle of awakening, short of which we are definitely doomed. So there you have it. Another thoroughly depressing installment of Global Alert News. And yes, it is that bad. But here's my question. How can we possibly hope to make any difference whatsoever if we don't collectively, first and foremost, fully face the unspun truth? How? How can we make a difference otherwise? I hear from some that feel compelled to give me their advice about all that I'm doing wrong regarding my non-political gloves-off unspun news broadcast. They say what I need to do is spread hopium and happily ever after good cheer that they say will get the job done. Really? How's the just think happy thoughts and everything will magically work itself out strategy gone so far as the entire web of life on Earth, including the whole of the human race, is circling the drain? And no, I won't spin the truth ever. I won't spread false hopium ever. I will continue to man my appointed post and sound the alarm at the top of my lungs so long as I'm still standing. And about the longed for happy ending, here it is. If when you take your last breath, you're doing all you can, given your individual circumstances, to fully face the unspun truth, to fully face the wider horizon, no matter how dark it is, to properly prioritize by first facing the most dire and immediate threats we collectively face, and to help awaken others to the wider horizon, then you are on the right path. You're on the narrow road. What could be more important than that? What story could end better than knowing you correctly, morally, and honorably put to use your only true possession, your God-given will, the only possession that can never, ever be taken from you? That's solace. That's a happy ending. And if we collectively forge forward in this fight with that level of unyielding conviction, we may yet accomplish profound good even at this late hour. And there's only one way to find out. Please join geoengineeringwatch.org in this all-important battle to expose and halt the greatest and most destructive assault yet launched on creation by elements of the human race. Geoengineering operations, aka weather warfare, which are mathematically the greatest and most immediate threat we collectively face short of nuclear cataclysm. Every breath you take is laden with invisible to the naked eye nanoparticles, a ubiquitous contamination of the entire planet and all that lives. Total disruption of weather patterns, decimation of the ozone layer. I could go on. Please make your voice heard. Share credible data from a credible source. Geoengineering Watch will continue to do all we can to be the go-to source on solid breaking data and the most effective activist materials to get the conversation going. Check the activist suggestions link on the homepage of Geoengineering Watch for specific instructions on how you can move this fight forward. We must make every day count. We are almost out of time. The controllers of the Matrix will certainly play much bigger cards soon, and they hold many. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington with geoengineeringwatch.org.